Hello, good morning to you. So thankful for you and thankful for each and every day, but we're especially thankful for the Lord's Day. We're thankful to return to Him worship, thanksgiving, praise, devotion, and we're thankful you're here for that purpose. We're especially honored if you're a guest. Please let us get to know you better and let us know how we can help you. As we enter into this time, before we dive into our study, I do want to put out a special reminder and a special plea that you'll consider singing in the park. And I forgot to download that, didn't I? It's in that folder on Google Drive if you can navigate it. If not, we'll go old-fashioned. We'll go blank today. I know Cole can work it out, though. But let me put out a special plea for Winfield's Singing in the Park tonight. After we dismiss here, we'll have our singing emphasis at 5 o'clock. And then, so gentlemen, be picking out those songs, one or two songs. Love to have you lead those tonight. And then after we dismiss here from our service, we'll gather up and hope we have enough to take the van. Know that we'll have a good time if we are able to do that. Convoy, however we need to. We'll go grab some fast food there in Winfield before going to the park. At 8 o'clock, sing for about 45 minutes, maybe up to an hour, and then we'll head back. And it's a great evening. If you're especially an adult, you may want to bring a lawn chair. Everybody probably wants to bring a can or two of bug spray. It's right up next to the woods, the park is. But always a good crowd, always a good time, and great way to spend some of these summer Sunday nights at those singings. So if you've been considering it, go ahead and decide to do it. Let's plan to do it and spend that good time together and also enjoy that singing, that praise to God. Also want to enter in and talk about Indian Creek Youth Camp for just a moment so we can explain maybe a little further what you see in the bulletin about camp. This year for our week 4, led by David Carrington and Paul Kelsey, had over 170 people there total, 175 range from best I can remember. And over the course of the whole week, we had 5 baptisms during the course of the week, so that's fantastic. 2 responded requesting prayers and asking to be restored to the Lord, and so we're thankful for those 7 souls that were publicly made right with the Lord. We're thankful for their decisions to do that. Ryan's already mentioned our own Addie Graves, who responded and was baptized into Christ. That was Tuesday morning, and she had a sense of urgency about her to do that. She interrupted her Bible class teacher to tell her, I need to be baptized. And so we're thankful for that urgency and that understanding that represents. And so she came and told me and said, as soon as we can get family down here, let's do this. And so we're thankful for her decision to do that. We also, you hope you'll notice in the bulletin, we listed several awards. We had about 11 campers, best of my ability to count several times, and so they all did great. All had a wonderful time together. There we go. Thanks, gentlemen. Great job. All had a wonderful time together, and all were well behaved and all enthusiastic, and I loved looking around the room and seeing them singing out, hearing them singing. It was such a great thing. Had several that received awards. During the week, Monday through Thursday, there are 6 different Bible classes broken down by age. And in the 8 and 9-year-old Bible class, in every Bible class, they pick one boy, one girl as the best student. In the 8 and 9-year-old Bible class, Lakin Molnax was chosen as the best boy student. In the 10 and 11-year-old Bible class, Mike could say Paris swept that one. Addie was given the girl best Bible class student award, and Dax received the boy award. We're thankful for them. They also give out a Spirit of Love award, which is a loving, thoughtful attitude, stands out for being mindful of other people. They give a junior award and a senior award. So when they combine all of the younger cabins, they gave one boy, one girl, and we swept that one too, if you will. I know this is not competitive, but Addie, that's especially ironic in light of this morning's lesson, you'll see. But Addie was the girl recipient of that Spirit of Love award for the junior side, and Koa Woods received that award on the boys' side for the junior cabins, junior group. And then the overall award, junior, senior, Miss and Mr. ICYC, the senior female, senior young lady was Emily Gerganis, Miss ICYC. So you pack all of the good stuff in there, attitude and participation and encouragement, all of that. Emily was recognized as the girl, Miss ICYC. So we had 11 great campers. We're thankful for these that were recognized publicly, but we're so thankful that they were down there. I especially hope we realize that it's never easy to make that whole week work out for families. And we had several families who were on vacation the week before, who came back Friday or Saturday and turned right around and sent their kids to camp. You'll look and you won't see Sawyer Burton, who was there at camp with us all week. Well, they're on their way to Disney World now. So they went camp, then vacation. Just think about the turnaround that is. But what a tremendous commitment it is, an opportunity it is to grow spiritually together. So I hope that you'll see those students, recognize them, tell them thank you, and their families as well. And one final challenge. If you've got a 6-year-old or older in your household, if you'll pull out your phone right now, program these dates in your calendar. Set yourself a reminder for 6 months from now, June 21st through 26th. Let's do our best to increase that number. We had about 13 from Parish. Let's double that. Maybe get to 30. We talk about kids, campers, talk about adults who are able to serve as a counselor or other capacities. What a great way to impact souls of young people, and to do so just right down the road and in a very loving and fantastic way. So thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your encouragement. And I hope and pray that we'll make plans so that next year we can have an even greater impact together. If you order things online very much, you may be familiar with this option bar. When you do a search and you're looking for a book or looking for maybe shoes or whatever it is, a part for a car or an appliance or something like that, you can always go and you can sort your search results, any number of factors, any number of ways, so that you see them in a certain order. One of the options is to sort them by price. I suppose if you're looking for quality, maybe you would choose high to low, but I'm thinking most of us would always choose low to high. We want to see the results ranked from one measure of value to another. Low value to high value. That's a helpful feature when it comes to online shopping, the online retail world. But here's a question for us as we consider some spiritual realities. Do we view people like that? Do we go about ranking lives, ranking people from low to high? That everybody fits on some scale? Whether that's a scale dependent upon money or status or background or parents or location or skin color, job, age. We can choose any number of factors, but do we ever get into the habit of judging based on those factors and then ranking low to high? I'm sure you're sitting there thinking the same thing I am, and yes, far too often we do. Here's the reality about that, the truth about that. When we get in the habit of exercising that kind of judgment, we are in no way acting out of love. There's no way that we can claim to be people of love, especially the love of God. The love that God commands us to have, the love that God has shown us to have, and still have this system of ranking people by their value, by their perceived value. When we recognize every soul is worth the same to God, we must realize that every soul is valuable to each of us. In the course of our study this summer, we're doing our best to learn from Christ how to love. Love like this. This is love. And we see these lists of attributes in 1 Corinthians 13, and we're helped when we dive into that text. It's a helpful thing to see that list. But we also don't want to fall into the habit of looking at each line item as a to-do list and just kind of isolating them from the whole. We don't want to be over literal, and so looking at the life of Jesus can help us to kind of bridge that gap. We can look at the list, we can look at the attributes, but then we can also look at the life of Jesus and see how He lived and how He loved, so that we can better love one another as He loved us. Ephesians 5, verse 2, walk in love as Christ loved us and gave Himself up for us. This morning we move on in 1 Corinthians 13. We find the next two qualities in that chapter, the verbs that describe love, are that love does not envy. Love does not boast. When we look at the life of Jesus, we see that He had interactions with people that would have been considered, quote, above Him, and yet He never lived a life of envy. He lived among people that, from a fleshly perspective, from a society perspective, may have been seen as below Him, and yet He never lived a boastful life. See, envy is the judging upward out of insecurity. Boasting is the judging downward out of pride, personal pride. Jesus never did either of those things. As we consider those principles together about Jesus' life, let's turn to Luke chapter 14. Luke the 14th chapter, we see an interaction that Jesus has with the Pharisees and also with a man who is sick. And he models for us how to love such that we do not envy, we do not boast. Luke chapter 14, let's begin in verse 1. One Sabbath, when he went to dine in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. Let's pause for just a moment. There's a lot of background building to this stage since we're already in Luke 14. If you would have read all the way through to this stage, you'd have seen that there's already opposition growing between the Pharisees and Jesus. And one of the common issues is this deal about the Sabbath day. And they're trying to pin on him that he is not able and should not be healing on the Sabbath day. That's come up multiple times. You see at the end of verse 1, they were watching him carefully. Well, that's repeated or said first in chapter 6 of Luke, where it says they were watching him carefully to see if he would heal on the Sabbath day. And so what you begin to see quickly with just the background in mind to this point is they've set this stage up. Yes, a prominent man of the Pharisees has invited Jesus. Well, why would they invite a man that they have this opposition with? Well, clearly they're trying to pin something on him. They're watching him carefully so they can catch him in some manner of inconsistency or some manner of breaking the law, and they can have him killed, have him destroyed. And so they invite him, and he goes. Isn't that interesting that he goes? When we think about envy, the judging upward, when we think about boasting, judging downward, it's easy for those two things to happen toward people that we are at a far distance away from. Take politicians or celebrities or just people we don't know in general. Sometimes we can quickly rush to judgment about them. But the other group of people that it's easy to rush to those judgments about, envy or boasting, either one, are people we are close to when there's a disagreement, when there's some strife, when there's opposition. That's when we begin to look for some explanation. We begin to look for some way to wedge in a judgment that'll make us feel better about the situation. And so here you have the opposition growing, and their envy is growing toward him. And he still goes to eat. Don't we learn something just by the fact that he goes to eat with them, despite their growing opposition? If I'm being honest, somebody's at odds with me in such a public way, trying to pin things on me, trying to kill me, I'm going to be very tempted to not even go. But Jesus goes. Or maybe if I go and I go with a fleshly motive, I want to go to straighten things out in an aggressive way, a rough, confrontational way. That's not why Jesus goes. Or maybe I go and I want to go smooth things over. Let's let them know that everything's okay. That's not why Jesus goes. He goes so that he can still be consistent in saying that he cares about sinners, that he came to seek and save the lost. He cared about Pharisee souls just as he cared about other souls. So he's there eating with them at this feast on the Sabbath day. Typically, when we would be in a position where the ruler of the Pharisees, a ruler of the Pharisees, is hosting us, we might look up and we might be nervous and wondering, what's he thinking about me? But notice the reverse is happening. They're looking at Jesus. They're watching him closely, diagnosing and dissecting every single move of his to try to catch him in something wrong. But then verse 2 introduces a new character. Behold, Luke says, a man with dropsy appears. What's dropsy? It's a form of an inflammation disease, swelling. So fluid accumulates, can happen almost any part of the body. We still see it happen today, but back then they had no antibiotics. They had no modern medicine to clear that fluid. And so you can see how that could potentially get dangerous without our modern medicine. Could lead to heart failure, could lead to breathing difficulties, could lead to liver failure. And so this was no small thing. It was an obvious thing as well. They knew he was there and was sick. Now, we don't know for sure if they planted him, but Luke's use of the word behold may clue us in that, hey, they're like, well, what do you know? A sick man happens to arrive on this day of the Sabbath when you're eating with us, Jesus. You can see how it would not be a stretch that they would have invited him for that purpose. It was also possible that people could pass through and observe the meal, be a spectator of the meal. You see some of that kind of happening in Luke 5 with Matthew and that meal. But nonetheless, here's Jesus. They're trying to pin this on him, and a sick man is on the scene. So it creates this possibility for some tension. See, Jesus was in a perspective that, from an earthly perspective, an earthly situation, he could have envied the Pharisees and their rulers. He could have looked down on the man with dropsy, the man who was sick, the man who could not tend to himself. But he chooses love. The Pharisees, they're involved in this situation too, and they are looking at Jesus with envy. We've got to figure out how to catch him. And the truth's going to come out in the next few verses. They look at the man with dropsy with that sense of boasting, a sense of arrogance toward him. Let's go back to the text and read verse 3 through 6. Luke 14, beginning verse 3. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, he puts the question on them, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. Then he took him, the man with dropsy, and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, which of you, having a son, some translations say donkey, or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. So now you see everything come to the surface. There's three main characters involved: Jesus, the Pharisees, the man with dropsy. And Jesus refuses to buy into envy in the shadow of the Pharisees, but he also refuses to exercise a boastful attitude toward the man with dropsy. And you see exactly the opposite happen with the Pharisees. They're envious of Jesus, and they put themselves above this man who is sick. When Jesus puts them on the spot with his questioning, see, he knows and they know it's not unlawful. It's fine. It's allowed by the law to heal people on the Sabbath. And he also knows that they would say otherwise or might pretend otherwise. He knows that's inconsistent with what they practice, because they will quickly fetch out their prized animals, their prized work animals, out of a ditch, out of a pit, if it happens on the Sabbath day. So he's making the point, fellas, listen, you're trying to catch me, you're trying to put me in a tough spot, but yet you already have proven you care more about animals than you do people, especially the people that cannot pay you back, especially the people that require the most effort to serve and to love. So you see a stark contrast between how they each treated the other parties in every direction. So we think about this incident kind of setting us up, and we think about envy and boasting together, this couplet in 1 Corinthians 13. I think a helpful way is to go back in our childhood and think about a seesaw. Envy and boasting are on the same coin overall. They're on the same trajectory, but one is from one direction, the other is from the other direction. As we've already said, envy looks up, boasting looks down. Both are out of judgment. Envying is trying to pull the other party, the party above us, down to our level. Boasting is an attempt to make the other party envious of us. How do you win in a game of seesaw? If you're young and you're kind of playing it rather innocently, you don't win, right? You just have fun going back and forth, back and forth. But some of you gentlemen, I saw you smirk when I asked, how do you win? Because when you get a little older, you get a little more aggressive, you win by knocking the other person off. That plays into our point even more. That if we ever get into the game of envy and boasting back and forth, the competition between one another, the only way we, quote, win is when someone gets hurt. It's so tempting to judge motives, to judge hearts, to judge value. And whichever side we think we're on, we do our hardest and our best to try to level the playing field. I'm going to knock them down. I'm going to make it hurt while they're down. Jesus shows us to love like him, is to never fall into that thinking, to never act out of envy, to never act out of boasting. See, envy happens when maybe I'm not successful, when I have a failure. Maybe I look and I say, well, I just don't measure up, and so I resort to envy. Or maybe I see someone else have great success. They're more talented, they're more skillful, they have a better status, a better set of gifts, and so I'm envious. Boasting works the opposite way. When I am successful, when I do something great, I look down. When maybe you have a failure, I'm going to look at you and kind of say, well, that's what you get. And I allow arrogance to come in and poison my attitude toward people that I should be loving, made in the image of Christ. It's interesting, since this phrase, love does not envy, love does not boast, that's found in 1 Corinthians 13, latter half of verse 4. Earlier in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 3 specifically, he tells them, I wish that I could write to you deeper. I really need to be giving you meat, but I still have to keep coming back through and giving you milk. You remember how he says, here's how I know you're immature spiritually? 1 Corinthians 3 verse 3, he says, while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh, behaving only in a human way? As long as you're going to rank and file one another in some kind of a system, you're still living by the flesh. I can't get deeper with you in spiritual matters because you're still exercising judgment as if you're just human beings in the flesh, instead of being spiritual beings who recognize the value of every soul. Proverbs 14 verse 30 says, envy makes the bones rot. It's an inward disease. It'll eat us from the inside out. Proverbs 27 verse 4, wrath is cruel, anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? See, wrath and anger, those are big time things to avoid. There's that proverb, jealousy, you can't even stand before it. It's even worse. It's even more significant than wrath and anger. Galatians 5, verse 26, on the heels of Paul imploring us to live by the Spirit instead of by the flesh, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. A quick way to stir up one another against each other is to exercise envy. Is to begin to rank everyone, put everyone on a scale, and put ourselves in the position of judging. That's how we get stirred up in a negative direction. What about boasting? There in 1 Corinthians, boasting is a key word. If you search and you see how often Paul talks about boasting, there's a major problem of theirs in Corinth. So for Paul to say love does not boast, it had significant implications for them. Those first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, you remember he says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, that's a great thing. We could see someone boasting about their tongue, about their spiritual gift. He also says, if I have prophetic powers, I understand all mysteries, have all knowledge. There again, you could see someone boasting about their spiritual gifts. If I give away all that I have, if I deliver myself up, my whole body to be burned for the sake of the Lord. Those are things that we could easily get caught up in boasting about, even though they are good and true spiritual things. Remember, he says they're in vain. We have nothing if we do them without love. Love does not boast, does not look down on someone for the sake of causing them to be envious of us. Proverbs 27, verse 2, let another praise you, not your own mouth, a stranger, not your own lips. Chapter 25, verse 27, it's not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. In Philippians 2, the verses right before Paul says, have this mind in you, which was yours in Christ Jesus. Right before he says that, he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit. Those are parallel ideas to envy and boasting. What's the result? What's the opposite of doing things out of selfish ambition and conceit? But in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. We're guided by the Lord. We see his example. We see his mind, his thinking, his heart. And we're drawn to ensure and to commit to never looking up negatively at someone with great success. We're committing to never looking down on a brother because we have success or because they are enduring some kind of hardship or failure. We don't have time to develop this, but just notice a couple of things, especially in light of what we read there in Philippians 2, that if you were to keep reading in Luke chapter 14, he goes through and the text calls them a parable, but they're not quite as formal. They're not as strict of parables as you'll see elsewhere in Jesus' teachings. But what he does is he looks and he sees they're jockeying for position around the table.
Here they are. They failed the test of this man with dropsy. And I noticed when they came in and sat down, they were fighting over the best seats. And so he tells a parable, a hypothetical scenario, to convict them and tell them, don't sit in the best seats, sit in the lowest seats. The takeaway from that section of teaching is verse 11. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. That's not a good thing, right? The Lord will humble us in a bad way, in judgment. But he who humbles himself will be exalted by the Lord. James 4 and verse 10, that same idea. Do we have the humility to recognize, to celebrate the successes of others instead of just jockeying for our own attention, for our own status? When I place myself next to God, I should always be humble and see how great and mighty and holy He is. But when I also place myself next to my brother or my sister, I should see that they are made in the image of God just as much as I am. And that whatever sin they have in their life, I also have sin. I'm just as much in need of forgiveness as they are. And so I have no reason to exercise pride and arrogance or insecurity next to other people when we're all in the shadow of God, in the shadow of the cross. But the next section of the text in Luke 14 tells another parable. First, he tells a parable to the guests around the table. Then he turns to that ruler of the Pharisees, a man with more, quote, political power than he had. And he says, you know, if you really want to be a godly host, here's how you do that. You don't set out your invitation list, your guest list, and invite the biggest and the best and the people that will make you feel better or make you look good. Instead, you invite the people that cannot pay you back. You invite the people that are hard to serve, that will stretch you. That's a picture of godly hospitality. It's always good to have friends and family and church family over. It's easy to host. That's fine. That's good. But the model of love that doesn't envy, love that doesn't boast, is to be able to serve and reach out to even those who cannot or maybe even choose to not repay us. Remember, Jesus has said, love your enemies. He says we'll be blessed because they cannot repay us. We'll be repaid with good, he says, at the resurrection of the just. All this reminds us what Jesus would teach in Matthew 20, that greatness is always service. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave. So we celebrate in humility successes and great gifts and status. And when others experience hardship and difficulties, and even when they trip up and sin, we're not there to pounce, make things worse. But we're willing to bear with them and show them love instead of showing them harsh judgment. And it ultimately comes down to value. Do we value every soul the way that God values every soul? Our own soul even. And don't miss, in the context of Luke, that this is setting the stage for chapter 15, which is all about value. It's the accusation. This guy eats with sinners. He receives sinners. Jesus makes it clear why he does that. Because of the celebration, because of the far-reaching efforts of God to ensure that the lost have a way back home and the joy that happens when they do come back home. We cannot get to a place where we celebrate the lost coming to the Lord. When we celebrate those who are among our number who do come back, we can never get there. Whether it's the sheep or the coin or the son, we can never get there ourselves. With jealousy, with envy, with boasting and pride in our hearts. To carry out the mission of God, to seek and save the lost, demands we love, and that demands we rid envy and boasting from within. As we close and think about the cross, as we said, we could go to that singular incident, those few days, that week, and we could look at all these attributes just there at the cross, but we want to spend our time in our everydays of Jesus, but we do want to close each week in thinking about the cross. And it's interesting that in Matthew 27, Pilate's been assessing the case and it's been building. And so Pilate knows it's time to make a choice. And he's not really going to make a choice. He's going to kind of weasel out of things the best he can. Interesting phrase. Both Matthew and Mark say that he perceived that the Jews had brought him out of envy. You hear that? The Jews were envious of Jesus, so they brought him to Pilate, brought him through this trial, this set of trials that were all illegal. They were not warranted. Pilate knows deep down he's innocent. Has even gotten this warning from his wife. Don't touch this man. He's innocent. Wife's dream. So it was the custom to allow, at this time of year, to allow a prisoner to be let go. And so he's hoping he kind of passed the buck and let them rethink their decision. So he says, let's put Jesus, this man, they still don't have a good charge against him. Let's put him next to Barabbas. Matthew calls him notorious. Mark calls him a murderer in the insurrection. So rebellion happens, and in the process of that rebellion, Barabbas murders, kills someone. Elsewhere, he's called a robber. If we're comparing, which is what envy and boasting drive us to do, there's no comparison. But Pilate forces them to choose. And don't miss, you saw it back in Luke 14, you see it here. When we live by judging, we live by envy, we live by boasting, we will always have to choose and pick sides. And oh, for a church in Parrish, Alabama, right here today, who refuses to pick sides, who refuses to buy into envy and boasting and instead always chooses love. What did Jesus do, though, when he was compared to Barabbas? Kept his mouth shut. He opened not his mouth. There was no sin found in his life, no sin found on his lips. There was no comparison, and yet he did not beg, he did not correct, he did not challenge Pilate's authority over him, but instead, he willingly accepted the punishment Barabbas was due. And we better look at Barabbas and put our face on his body and his life every time. Because Jesus died for our murders, for our rebellion, for our robberies, for our immorality, for our hard hearts, for our envy, for our boasting. He didn't have to, but he had to from within. His love compelled him to go there, so he never envied, he never boasted, despite this constant cycle of comparison. This morning, do you need to respond to that love, to his love? You don't have to wait. You don't have to put it off. Please do not put it off. You can come to him and know that when you submit your life to his command to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins, he washes you clean. And you can live that new life of love, beyond envy, beyond boasting. Live a life that brings glory to him. If you've wandered away, you've gotten caught up in those emotions of judging, know that he forgives you. He promises to forgive you. If you need to make your life right in light of those things, know that we stand here as the people of God, not looking down on you, not judging you, but here to walk with you through anything that you face, through anything in the past that you need to overcome, through anything in the future you're worried about. Know that we are here for you in love, through the love of God. If you have those needs, would you come and come as we sing?